Spartan actually had the majority of the contracts from the federal government, and this was a federal government job. They had started doing the photo mapping with Air Force personnel in the late 1940s, but with the Korean War and various other concerns, they decided to do contracts to do the photo mapping across Canada.
Spartan pushed the limit in the high altitude at 35,000. They were really the only people who flew at 35,000. Of course, from the mapping point of view, less pictures.
Start in the spring, usually around third week in May, and then as the snow melted and the ice melted, we'd keep moving further north, until you'd end up in the Arctic Islands. Around September, you start moving back again, staying ahead of the snow. And then in the winters, we used to go down to either Colombia, Dominican Republic, and do photography down there. So it was like, I always just think we're migrating birds. We're going up and down, up and down. It wasn't a great married life, but that's the way it was.
It was all new information for Canada. It took a long time. It took 10 years of high altitude photography and about another 10 years before the first level of mapping was done.
It was a high-level aircraft, so the photography is done either at 30,000 feet above sea level. If we worked in the Yukon, you had to work at 35,000, and that would give you about a mile-to-the-inch photography.
The concentration on the part of the pilot and the navigator and the camera operator was very intense. You have a camera, and the requirement is for that to be pointing as vertically to the ground as possible. So the pilot, when he knows a photograph is about to be taken, would make sure the plane was level, both in roll and in pitch, so that the distortion of the resulting image would be as little as possible.
My job was to navigate down the line, keep as close as you can, and the camera was adjusted to the speed of the aircraft, so it would fire at certain intervals.
It was extremely high quality photography, but what they're shooting were negatives that were this big, 9¼ inches squared. That's a huge negative.
Spartan used the revolutionary Swiss wild camera. This rare example was donated to the Calgary Mosquito Society.
This is a RC5A. I think this is the only one that I know of. These cameras were designed as mapping cameras. The resolution of it is unbelievable. Even in those days, it was $20,000 a camera, a complete camera. You could buy a house between $5,000 and $8,000, so it's a pile of money.
The crews sent in the films, which had to be developed in-house. Then we started checking for forward overlap and lateral overlap.
Taking photos that overlap allowed the cartographers to combine them to create stereographic 3D images. Similar to the way 3D movies work, seeing the same image from different angles lets you calculate the depth of the image. This is how topographical maps were made.
My job was preparing flight maps and checking the photography that came in. You had to check for everything. If there was a gap, then they had to fill in the gap.
There were gaps, and gaps are not just for errors. Gaps are because of cloud. Gaps are because of shadow. If the leaves are out, the photography is no good, what they call leaf-free photography.
If it was good weather for a number of days, there would be a lot of films coming in. But on the other hand, if there was no weather, there might not be any for weeks.
They were about 4-hour trips. Didn't take us long to get to the areas because of where we were stationed.
We left about 3 o'clock in the morning, went over to Resolute and refueled, and then headed north to Alert Bay. And we photographed the last bit of land in the Arctic, well past the magnetic North Pole, and that was the one day we got a full day of clear weather in.
There was a lot of downtime because you're always looking for weather.
We got there on June the 6th and we left there on August the 15th, and it snowed at least 23 days.
They never assigned us to anyone. We had our own choice of who we wanted to fly with. There was a lot of, I want to fly with that fellow because he doesn't have what we used to call reflights. So reflight is when you get offline and then you have a a side gap. So then you have to go back and pick that up. It's very expensive. You were rated by the percentage of reflights you had by the number of miles you flew in 1 year. So if the navigator had a very low percentage of reflights and you had a good pilot, then you two would try to get together.
When you got to the end of a photo area, the time it took you to turn around was dead time. We didn't get paid for those miles. We got paid from there until we started over there. So getting it around and lined up, and that was a coordination between the navigator, the pilot, and the camera operator. All three had to be working together.
Traditionally, there's one high pressure area that comes across the Arctic in the summer, and it lasts from anywhere from a week to 10 days. We try to make sure that the planes are serviced, because a week to 10 days you do nothing but fly. We would do 2 4-hour trips and 1 2-hour trip. We were doing this at 30,000 feet, unpressurized, sucking on oxygen. So you can imagine after a week to 10 days, even though we're young guys, we were dragging our butts a little bit at the end of that period.
I feel very happy that I worked in this era, because we had a big job to do. We're a big country, and we did it, and it was a real achievement.